Good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock, the time we agreed we would meet and catch up and get a chance to hear what my colleague Jacqueline has to say and share with us. But before I give her the floor, let me do a few introductions and a few housekeeping insights. So we thank you all for joining us, and you are very warmly welcomed. And today we will be listening and hearing about the role of coaching and leadership in the voluntary sector, something which maybe you should know a lot about, and I'm very sure we'll be inspired by the end of the session. We'll be asking you to give us your thoughts and ideas and insights. Note that this webinar is being recorded. The reason we are doing it is because we are hoping to share the webinar with our colleagues and friends who are unable to attend, but also because we are going to be sharing the recording on the Center for Voluntary Sector Leadership website, as well as on in our newsletter, forthcoming newsletter. So the chat mics and cameras have been disabled due to numbers, obviously, but also to avoid people, some interference from wherever we find ourselves. If you want to say something, ask a question, please use the question and answer tab, which is on the very top, just next to the people. And, I'm excited and looking forward to hearing what my colleague Jacqueline has to say. I don't think she needs much introduction, and I'm very sure as she goes along with her presentation, you'll hear more about her practice, both in the voluntary sector, in academia, and beyond. Over to you, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Fidel, and thank you very much for inviting me to lead on this session. And I'm delighted to be speaking to people from the voluntary sector, a sector that I feel is probably propping up the whole of the UK at the moment, and probably always has done. So it's lovely to be here. So I'm going to talk to you about how coaching can help your organisation. My name's Jacqueline, Jacqueline Baxter, and I'm Professor of Public Leadership and Management. I'm an executive coach and a member of the Association of Coaching. And my interest in coaching began some time ago when I started to supervise teachers through their postgraduate certificate in education programme. And I found out that their assumptive worlds were very different from my own, and that they very often needed to reframe their thoughts in relation to their issues and problems. Not only that, but I needed to reframe my thinking in order to help them to resolve some very sticky challenges that they were encountering. During this period, I did a lot of work around the thinking of John Heron. And John Heron is a psychologist, and his 6-category intervention analysis has been used in coaching and mentoring as well as in counselling for many years now. It's been very influential. Since then, I've coached and mentored many people, from CEOs to trainee lecturers, and most recently I'm a UK RI leadership mentor, which is mentoring people to carry out research under the UK RI handle. What we're going to start off with, though, is finding out a little bit about what you already know about coaching and mentoring. And to do this, I'd like you to go to the link here, www.classpoint app on your phones, and use code 29035. That's code 29035. And put in what comes to mind when you think of coaching and when do you use it. So what comes to mind? Because there's a lot of confusion about coaching and mentoring, and when it's used and who it's for as well. So just pop in your answer there, and we'll see what people come up with. So as I say, the link is www.classpoint.app and use code 29035 to join. And that will hopefully come up on the screen very soon. So coaching, it has become a really common kind of term around executive leadership, and much of the time people say, oh, I wouldn't be entitled to any coaching, I'm not a CEO of a charity or anything like that. You know, the likes of me don't get coaching, I'm just the finance manager, or I'm just the operations manager, or I'm just the marketing board. But in actual fact, coaching goes across the board, and it's not just for senior executives, and it's not just done by external coaches. And today's session is going to outline how you, as leaders in your organization, whether that's a middle leader or a senior leader, no matter whether you're just supervising one person or whether you're supervising a whole team, how you can actually use coaching to help your organizational objectives. So thank you for doing that, Class Point. We're getting a lot of different responses coming up on the screen now. Let me just switch that rather irritating little ditty off. So we've got lots of things. So pertinent, asking questions that help. Yes. Ownership, yeah, making people take ownership. That's a fantastic contribution. Thank you for that. It's making people responsible for their own development and their own future success, but in such a way that it's a structured framework that you can use. Work through challenge, seeking to understand. Yes. Guidance, yes. Sharing knowledge as well. Yes, sometimes it's the sharing of knowledge. Very often when I'm coaching, I'll draw on established models that we use within the teaching of business, such as Hertzberg's motivation model, to explain why somebody might be feeling demotivated in spite of things seemingly going quite well with the organisation. So thank you for that. I'm going to close that submission now and let me turn that into a slide for you so we capture that all nicely, and we'll have a few stars for everybody just because we can. Okay. So thanks for that. So lots and lots of different ideas there about the whole area of coaching. Inspiring, I also like very much. And the idea above inspiring of co-ideation as well. So yes, creating new ideas together through collaboration. And we'll come back to all that as we go along. So what's the difference between mentoring and coaching? Well, actually, it's a grey area and there's a lot of overlaps, but specifically, if you're mentoring somebody, you're very often providing insights into the culture and nature of organizations. It's partly instructional. So it's a partnership in which one experienced guides a person that's less experienced. So if I mentor a new member of staff in the department, I'm imparting my words of wisdom, and hopefully only words of wisdom and not cynicism, to that new member of staff. I'm kind of saying to them, this is how we do things around here as well, which can be incredibly useful when we're working online, as many of us are now. I know many third sector organisations have at least 50% of their teams working remotely. And also when you're mentoring, you're providing a role model for knowledge and skills. So, for example, in my role, I could be providing a role model in relation to research, or possibly in relation to teaching and pedagogy. When you're providing a role model for your staff, you're saying, this is how we act, this is how we behave, this is how we do things around here. And sometimes, you know, when that knowledge is absent in the case of virtual teams, that it becomes an incredibly powerful thing to do. And in fact, I've just written a paper that shows that actually COVID put the most immense pressure onto leaders, middle leaders and CEOs, because they were having to fill in all the gaps that would normally be filled in around the water cooler and that sort of place, you know, those informal conversations that are so powerful in creating our sense of who we are within the organisation and what our role is as well. So what's coaching then? Well, coaching is helping the trainee to progress in their career. It's the same as mentoring in that sense. It's also helping them to be more effective, to improve their self-knowledge. So to actually get them to realise perhaps what their strengths and weaknesses actually are, and to examine their behaviours in relation to other people and their own career success. So if you're coaching somebody for a leadership position, you're in essence beginning with, you know, why would you want to do this, and where does your particular skill set fit in with how you think of leaders. And as I said before, framing and reframing situations so that people can think of them in slightly different ways. It's almost like looking through a camera. So if you look through a camera, if I take my phone here and I'm looking through a camera, I'm seeing a certain vision of the world when I hold up my camera. If I just slightly turn that a couple of degrees, I see an entirely different picture. And that's exactly what you'd be doing when you're coaching somebody. You'd be shifting their consciousness so they see a slightly different picture. And it's amazing, isn't it, how we live in our own assumptive worlds. So even within the same organization, a CEO's world is completely different to somebody who's managing the finance team, who's the marketing person or the comms person. Their worlds are very different. And when we're short of time and when we're trying to develop people, quite often we forget to actually explore their reality first. Because if we don't explore their reality, then the quid pro quo is we're going to be coming in with advice and guidance that seems to them as if we're speaking a foreign language. So probing those assumptive worlds, very, very important. So why is coaching and mentoring so important to organisational growth and also to achieving your strategic objectives? Well, since COVID, as we're all aware, there's been a great amount of turbulence in the workplace and in third sector organisations in particular. You know, I mentioned that I think that third sector organisations are propping up the entire country, and that isn't really an exaggeration. And of course, we're all having to do more with less because of the economic constraints and the pressures on our staff as well that are suffering from the present economic situation, not to mention world turbulence. In remote teams, as I said earlier, there's become a disconnect between employees and organisations. So those really informative conversations that you used to have informally in the kitchen while you were microwaving your soup or around the water cooler are not happening. And because they're not happening, these are leaving massive gaps in terms of people getting to grips with organisational cultures, how we do things around here and what we are about. And that has a knock-on effect of them, their feelings of sense of place. What am I doing in this organisation? What am I doing in this charity? You know, I've got my own job to do, sure, but actually, you know, the bigger picture on a daily basis, I'm finding it very difficult to connect with that bigger picture. There's plenty of evidence, for example, Khalid and all, that it aids performance, well-being, and also the behaviours of employees. It aids employees and leaders through times of turbulence. And 84% of employees would be interested in career coaching if offered. And that was a survey by Radstad, their Work Monitor report in 2022. So who gets it and how valuable is it? Well, employees think it's valuable, and actually employers think it's valuable as well. But unfortunately, there are some misconceptions. So, for example, this study showed, the Radstad study showed, that 38% of employees think it's for those who've been identified as future leaders. 33% think it's for those who are only working in growth areas or change management growth teams. And 27% believe that it's only for executives or senior exec leaders. And actually, this presentation will show you that coaching is for everybody. And it doesn't have to be done by somebody who comes in and is paid a lot of money to coach. That can have its advantages, however, but I'll come on to that later when we discuss that kind of coaching and the model for coaching. So there are many benefits of leaders doing the coaching. What do you think some of them might be? Just let's do another little quiz to see what you think the benefits of a leader doing coaching instead of a coach that comes in from the outside, somebody like me doing coaching. Go again to ClassPoint app and use code 29035. What's the advantages of you as a leader doing your coaching for your team?
Oh, Jacqueline, I think we've got the music back on. Should we just, it's quite loud.
Oh, is it? Yes,
Perfect, thank you.
I mean, they could at least give us a bit of Taylor Swift, couldn't they, on that, rather than that funky telephone type of kiosk music, but there you go. Okay, so some nice responses here. So knows the detail of the role. Absolutely. When I go in to coach somebody, the first thing I have to do is understand about the role and their organizational setting. Whereas you, as a leader, you're familiar with that. You can build a culture. Absolutely. It gives you a huge political edge in relation to building your organizational culture in a very personal way. You know the relevance to the organization and the strategy. You know where the organization needs to go and where that person needs to go in relation to the organization. So again, very, very powerful. You know, you can get to understand your employee an awful lot more by coaching, and that can give you an advantage as well. You can find out what makes them tick. And later on, we'll be looking at some questions and some resources, which I'll also be giving out at the end of the session in your post-session email, that allow you to ask some very detailed and searching questions that can really give you insights that help you with your role as well. Creating a cohesive team is important. Absolutely. Breaking down barriers. So thanks for doing that. I'm going to close the submission there. And once again, we'll make it that as a slide that we can come back to a little bit later on if necessary. So just moving on there, it is important. So the benefits of coaching to charities are multifarious. Staff engagement improves, performance improves, retention improves, and integration, as we've already said, integration of individuals into the organisation. However, it is coaching doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like everything, it is very dependent on the organisational context. And looking at some of the pointers, the ways that are going to maximise this coaching to work, we can look first at support and accountability. When organisations see coaching as valuable, they're more likely to promote it to employees. Therefore, it becomes valued not only when people are receiving coaching, but when they're doing the coaching themselves. And of course, this can be cascaded. If you're a CEO and you're coaching your financial director, then your financial director will take from that and probably use those techniques, model themselves on you to use those techniques with their own staff. Trust and openness, that's very important. We'll come on to that in a minute. Employees are more likely to admit and seek help for mistakes, which aids the take up and roll out of coaching programs. So it gives people it gives you the chance to turn your organisation into a learning organisation. Excuse me, if it isn't already. We've talked about leaders embedding it in the organisational culture. It's also very important in relation to diversity and inclusion. And encouraging diverse coaching relationships really helps with that. So lots of different elements there in relation to coaching and the organisation. And of course, one of the most important elements, as I've already said, is the psychological safety that this engenders. So the fear of admitting mistakes can be overcome with healthy and productive coaching relationships. Blaming others lessens as a knock-on effect. There's lots of research that says that. It makes it less likely that people are not prepared to share different views. So therefore it reduces what we call in the trade groupthink, which is where everybody just agrees with everybody else because it makes for a far easier life. So if people have got the confidence to say things in a coaching relationship, and you then give them the confidence to say things in a more public way, then you can help with that doing away with the groupthink that's so common, particularly in small organizations. We're just going to have now just a wee pause for thought. I put in these pause for thoughts for two reasons, really. The first reason is because it gives you time to think about what I've just said. And the second reason is so that you can perhaps articulate some of the thoughts that you're having so far on a Padlet, which is another app which you should be able to see in the chat box. But I'm going to turn to my team, Emily, and ask if at this point we have any questions that people would like to ask.
Thank you, Jacqueline. So we've got the first questions come through, which is what are the steps or the first steps to starting a coaching culture in organisations?
Well, that's an excellent question, and I think the first step has to be to get our heads together and start to think about embedding a coaching policy in the organisation, and that might be doing a cost-benefit analysis of embedding coaching structure within the organisation. You start off with a coaching policy, and then you start to implement that policy via a variety of mechanisms, and there are some very good resources for that. I will send a link with the email that you send out at the end, Emily, with ways to start beginning to devise a coaching policy.
Oh, that's great. And I think about that implementation portion then. So why do you think that some organisations may sort of resist coaching, whether it be sort of external or internally?
Some organisations have a culture that does not encourage openness and sees mistakes as having dire consequences for an organisation and punishes mistakes so that people will never admit to their mistakes again. In such an organisation, particularly if that toxicity is led by a CEO, and I don't believe that anybody who's a toxic CEO would be here today, but there are toxic CEOs around. And of course, you may well be taking on staff that have come from very toxic third sector cultures, in which case people might be scared to start to become open, and also may need encouragement into the new culture, the culture of the organisation. And of course, initial coaching or mentorship is a great way to get that embedded. So starting off by, saying to people, okay, well, in this organisation, we see mistakes as hopefully avoidable, but if they do occur, then they're learning events.
Okay, that's really interesting stuff. And I think we've had a question through from Michael here, sort of trying to clarify the difference between coaching staff and mentors. So if a leader within an organization, coaching staff, like, should they be trained as a coach, or are they more of a mentor within their team or within their business?
Well, I mean, if you imagine a CEO who's doing the coaching, Michael, so you've got a CEO, but they don't have a financial background or they don't have a marketing background, and they're actually working with either the director of finance or the director of marketing. They can't mentor them because they don't come from that world. They don't have that background. So mentoring is very specifically using a similarity of background, to actually say, well, I do it like this, or I do it like that. Whereas coaching is actually not really ever saying, do it like I do, because I've found out it's a good way to do it. It's actually standing back and saying to the employee, and you'll see a bit later, Michael, how this works when I give you a model to work with, and saying to the employee, for example, well, have you thought about the perspectives that marketing might have on your change management program in finance? Can you just talk me through what you think perhaps the response of a different stakeholder might be? So you're giving them a different way to think of things. And that can either be done as a block or it can be done during those informal conversations or even meetings that you have on a daily basis with people. It'll become a little bit clearer when I show you the model a little bit later on.
No, that makes perfect sense. I think David's also had a question come through that is sort of relevant to the same sphere of influence there. He says, are there still organizations that don't have a coaching culture, sorry? And even if they do they just call it management?
Yeah, that's a really good one, actually. Yes, I mean, I have in the past coached people as an external coach who work in organizations that don't have a coaching culture, and actually whose bosses, when they found out that their employee is paying for coaching, have said, is this just a way for you to leak our secrets to the rest of the world? Which just shows the depth of suspicion that some, CEOs have. And I think in that case, to be quite honest with you, it is really difficult to do coaching because if you have a CEO that has such a high level of suspicion or such a high level of paranoia about protecting their own position at the expense of everybody else, then probably in these cases, the external coach would probably bring the employee around to thinking that that may not be the right place for them. But they do exist. And quite often the reason why they exist is either because they've got a very insecure CEO who's got a lot of huge amount of imposter syndrome. That can be quite common. They feel that they've been promoted beyond their talents, and they may well have been promoted beyond their talents. But also, and they can't give, they're not in a position of having enough confidence to be able to say, I will improve my staff, and therefore the more I improve my staff, the better our organisation is going to run. It's a very difficult situation, that, yeah.
I think that kind of ties in with that element of toxicity as well that you were mentioning, Jacqueline, about how those organizations can sort of generate their own benefits above their staff. So that's really interesting. Thank you. I'll keep monitoring the Q&A, but I'll let you carry on with your presentation.
Thanks a lot. Actually, it brings us really nicely into leading in to my next section, which I'd like you to think about in relation to a case study, because it's always easier to think about something if you're thinking about somebody rather than just an abstract. So this little story of somebody that I came across a few years back. Janice was taken on for a skill in marketing, but after a year in post, the CEO thought that they would stretch her and prepare her for a supervisory role in the organisation. But when they approached her with a task that they thought would stretch her and help develop her towards leadership, she was very unenthusiastic and very half-hearted about doing it. The result of that was that when the task was complete, the others in the team moaned about the poor job that she did. And that's hard for you because actually you'd given her a chance to prove herself. And because she did it in a very unenthusiastic, lackluster way, that's now reflected on you. and giving you a problem. So when you speak to her, she just dismisses your feedback with, oh, I'll never be any good at this. It's not really what I'm trained for. You know, I was trained to be a marketing professional, not somebody who, you know, can go across the board and know about marketing and finance and communications. So, you know, so there, you know, you are left as CEO or as Janice's, you know, manager with a really difficult issue. And what we call this in the coaching game, so to speak, is we call this a fixed mindset. And this is often what you're trying to do within coaching. So a fixed mindset, somebody with a fixed mindset says, I already know it all. I did my marketing degree, okay. I've come in, I've worked in marketing all my life. I know it. I know my job. And there's a fear there of actually doing something new or something that's going to pull them out of that comfort zone. They may also feel that they give up easily as well. I mean, that's another element of the lack of growth mindset, that they give up easily when they're given tasks that they feel might not fit with their existing skill set. They have a fixed mindset in relation to learning. They feel that they learned what they were going to learn at university or at school, and that's where learning ends. It takes place within an institution, and that's the beginning and the end of it. They don't look at learning as something that's lifelong. They often, you might hear them say, oh, I'll never be any good at this. Waste of time. It's a waste of time. I'll never be any good at this. And, you know, they're frightened of making mistakes, so therefore they do absolutely whatever they can do to avoid them. So these elements, and I seem to have, my mouse is going a bit crazy here, so you just have to bear with me a minute. I may just have to stop that share just while I get it under control. The opposite of that is a growth mindset. And in a growth mindset, you have people that want to learn, welcome feedback. And this is something that you're trying to encourage with your coaching, learning from others. I can train my brain and I can work hard to get better at something, and I'm going to keep trying. And I heard a great example of a growth mindset recently, somebody who was very introverted and terrified of public speaking. And they said, well, you know, it doesn't come naturally, but I worked at it, I went on courses, I exposed myself to public speaking as much as possible. And in the end, you know, the day came when somebody said, hey, you know, what a fantastic public speaker. It must be great to be such a natural like that. And they said to me, my goodness, you know, if they knew how hard I've worked to overcome the fear of public speaking, etc., they possibly wouldn't say that. They see mistakes as learning opportunities, and they want to be challenged because they enjoy being challenged and enjoy learning new things because it makes them feel good and feel more agentive and yeah, more powerful in their position. Okay, so what kind of format can you use for coaching? Is there a structure? Well, actually, there are a lot of structures that people use within coaching. And let's just have a look at a couple of them before we focus on one. So one structure is the stepper model here. And the stepper model involves looking at the subject. What's the subject of the coaching? What is the emotion that's being raised? What are the emotions that might be raised during this coaching session? What is the perception of your coachee? What plan are we going to put in place for improvement? And then how are we going to action that plan and amend it as we go along? We've got one that's called clear, which is contract, and I'll come on to that at the end, because the coaching contract, in an informal sense, not something that tells you how much they're going to pay you at the end, but in an informal sense, is very, very important. Contract is making an agreement, making it absolutely clear from the beginning what both parties are expecting from the coaching relationship. And as I say, I'll come back to that at the end. Contract, listen, explore, action and review. So you can see there's a pattern here. I'm not going to go through the others because I will give you a slide which shows them at the end, or a handout at the end, so you can explore them in your own time. But what I would like to do is go into more detail about a particular model of coaching, and that's the GROW model. And the GROW model has become incredibly powerful in organizations, and there are good reasons for that. It's simple. It's evidence-based. There's a massive amount of evidence out there that says that it's effective. It's clear, it's very clear, and it's dead easy to remember. So GROW stands for goal, reality, options, and where. And what I'm going to do now, if the gods of the internet permit it, is I'd like to show you a quick video that'll run us through what GROW is.
Being a coach is all about asking good, open questions, and this is where the GROW model comes in. GROW is a simple but effective framework that helps your coachee understand their challenges properly and identify what their next actions should be in order to reach a solution. Let's take a look at how it works. G stands for goals. The first few questions will help your coachee to establish an appropriate objective. For example, what do you want to achieve? What does your goal mean to you? When will you meet your goal? R stands for reality. You should then ask your coachee to think practically about their goal and how it would look in reality, using questions like, what support do you need to achieve your goal? What challenges do you expect to encounter? How might you deal with them? O stands for options. Next, ask your coachee to think of 3 or 4 things they could do that might help them reach their goal. Then work with your coachee to evaluate these options by asking questions like, what are the pros and cons of each option? Or what factors will you use to weigh up these options? W stands for will or way forward. Finally, establish how committed your coachee is to the actions they have agreed. To do this, ask the coachee to rate their commitment on a scale of 1 to 10. Explore together what would need to change or happen to get them to a 9 or even a 10. Identify some practical actions, such as blocking out an hour a week to work exclusively towards reaching their goal. Encourage your coachee to imagine how they will feel if they meet their objectives. Visualizing a successful outcome will motivate your coachee even more. So there you have it. By using the GROW model, you can help your coachee stay on track, engage in some genuine self-reflection, and identify relevant and realistic actions that will help them achieve their overall objectives.
And of course, the overall objectives can also be your objectives as well. So these can be shared objectives between the person that's doing the coaching, if you happen to be that leader, and the coachee. So those, as I say, those objectives can be shared. So let me just go back to my slide now, and we'll continue. So GROW's, as I say, a very powerful model, very, very well tested, and well tested because it's very, very straightforward to use. And you can be seen in the terms of a journey. I like to think of it in terms of destination, current location, and that again is going back to the assumptive worlds of individuals, the routes, and then the motivation that people have to get there. So we can use a variety of questions to think about these various stages. For example, the G, the start of the session, you can start off by saying, what's the long-term goal? What are your priorities at present? Very important to find out what the coachee wants to get out of the session and what success might look like. And what the way that I often do that is say, right, well, we've got 6 coaching sessions here, and you've carved out time to meet with me, and I've carved out time to meet with you. What does success look like on week 6? Any ideas? What would you like to be? Where would you like to be by week 6? And that way you can start to confront some of the assumptions as well. Because the biggest reason why coaching relationships fail in the literature is because you're working with 2 different sets of assumptions. You assume that the coaching's going to do this, and your coachee assumes it's going to do something else. Boundaries are very important as well. So assumptions, people can get confused about what coaching is, and particularly between what coaching and counselling is. And what you find often when you're coaching in a leadership position is you're going to start to get people's personal lives coming into this. And sometimes that's appropriate, but sometimes it may not be, and you may have to refer on. So coaching isn't counselling. And obviously, as an external coach, the boundaries are have to be made very, very clear, because you can get into very difficult psychological territory here. But internal coaching, it may be part of things that people do discuss what's happening in their personal lives. And if that's relevant to what you're discussing in terms of their career or their work life or their problems at the moment, then that's fine. But do be aware to try and hold the boundaries, because, you know, coaches are not trained counsellors, basically. A number of different questions, and I'll give you a little book which is absolutely invaluable in looking at this. So mouse is playing up again. There we go. I'm not going to bother to do it. I'm not going to bother to write on the board at this point because I think there's a signal lag. So if we just go to the second bit, the reality, you know, this is where you can find out about people's lives, and, you know, you can counter things like, oh, well, you know, I've got to as far as I'm going to get in this organisation. You can say, well, actually, what's inspired you to achieve what you've achieved so far? And, you know, can this be then used to inspire you to achieve a bit more? So your job as a coach, as a CEO coach or supervisor coach, is to change people's way of thinking, to try and break down the barriers that keep people inside their boxes and fearful of developing in the ways that they could develop and reach their potential. Think about different ways. People are often get stuck with problems, whereas you can actually say, well, actually, there's more than one way to achieve this goal. How might you go about it? And then, you know, you can, I mean, you could, there are quite offbeat questions like, what's your greatest superpower? You know, what's made you successful in other areas of your life? And that can be very powerful too. So let's go on to the next questions, and they are options. So questions that you can ask about options are things like, you know, how do you order? How do you manage your workload so that you can create success? And if failure wasn't an option of doing something, you know, what options would you come up with? Because people often let failure stymie them from actually thinking beyond. And that is because fear is a psychological constrainer. It's a fear that constrains us from developing more. And actually, there's a huge body of psychological research that says people that continually push out their boundaries develop far more into the person that they would like to be, their aspirational selves, than those that put down barriers because of fear and won't develop. So it comes back to that idea of a growth mindset again. What advice would you give to someone else in this situation? Somebody's got a problem and they're absolutely locked into thinking about that problem. They think they've got no way forward. Okay, so if this was your best friend and they were dealing with it, or if this was Tim from accounts and he was dealing with his problem, what advice would you give them? And suddenly, by actually articulating it in that way, people are able to leave their own insular thoughts and jump outside of the box. And in doing so, you free up the thinking in a more creative way. And then finally, we get to the will. How much will do people have to actually improve? And this is the point where you can establish their motivation. You know, what would they consider worse, failing or never trying? What support do you need going forward to help you to achieve your goal? And what's currently blocking you that really needs attention in your working life? So lots of different elements here. And we're going to have another little pause for thought and some questions before we go on to the last section, which is, you know, what challenges can arise, do you think, during a coaching session? So any questions or thoughts about that? And if you want to go back to the Padlet that was put up in the chat earlier and put down any thoughts there that you might be having, anything that occurs to you at all, that would be lovely to see as well.
We've had some reflections in the Q&A, which has been great. So David's reflected on Janice's sort of growth mindset scenario, stating that, did anyone ask if she wanted to move into a supervisory role? And I think that loops into that questioning and coaching. And can it be classified as coaching if a person wants stability over sort of traditional career growth?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very very good question, and not everybody does want to move into a leadership position. There are many people who get real satisfaction by doing their job at the level that they're at. But sometimes, particularly if you've been doing that job for a number of years, it's a bit like teaching, really. You teach the same thing for a number of years and you get stuck in your ways. And possibly sometimes there are better ways to teach something, but actually you're so bogged down with doing it in the same way because you adopted that way, it worked, and actually maybe we won't change it because at the end of the day, yeah, work's okay, it's good enough. Then, you know, some coaching can help people develop within their position as well and make them think more deeply about their practice. And of course, colleagues who've joined us who are from an academic background will recognise the model by David Bood, reflection on action is not the same as reflection in action. And that basically means, in lay terms, that when you're doing something, you're thinking in a different way. So, for example, you're getting through the day, you know. A lot of our MBA students at their final assessment say in their reflection, you know, I was so bogged down with just doing the job that what this qualification's done is it's made me really stand back and think about the way that I do stuff, and also what effect that has on colleagues and other elements of the organisation, whereas I've never thought of that before. I mean, I've been in accounts all my life. I think from a financial perspective. All my goals and agenda are from a financial perspective, but actually coming into contact with people who think slightly differently has maybe made me think, well, actually, do you know what? If I could tweak that a little bit, then actually my financial plans might be accepted a little more if I was thinking in relation to perhaps how they would be accepted by the sales force and what impact operationally they may have on that sales force. So I think we can think of coaching not only in terms of development to another role, but also development in role as well.
I think that brings us nicely on to sort of Min's question, where we've asked if a coachee can't come up with their own options in the GROW model, does the coach need to give suggestions themselves, or do they need to know about the appropriate options that they could suggest?
Sometimes it's best to reframe the question. So quite often, and but also to give thinking time as well. I mean, quite often when I'm coaching, I'll ask somebody a question and there will be a full minute silence, absolute silence. And I'm comfortable with that. But a lot of people aren't comfortable, particularly if you tend to be a little bit more on the extroverted side of things, which a lot of leaders are. Then you might be uncomfortable with that silence. But it's very important to give people the space to think. And sometimes a really pressing question or a pressing set of questions are best put at the end of the session. So you can say to the individual, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go away and I'd like you to think about that between now and when we next meet. And we'll come back to that. And I'd like to see what thoughts you've had in the meantime. The thing about coaching, and sometimes the way that it differs fundamentally from mentoring, is in mentoring, you can offer solutions. And sometimes coaches do that, particularly leader coaches. They'll say, well, you could do it that way, or you could do it that way, or you could use your own experience, because CEOs have that 360 overview, or should have, to say, well, actually, so-and-so in the operations department tried this a couple of weeks ago. It seemed to work. Do you think that might work for you? So you can use your knowledge to make suggestions. It depends what you're trying to achieve. And if you've got a particularly thorny or knotty issue with a member of staff that's perhaps based on their personality, then it's always better to get them to come up with the answers rather than you suggest something. So, for example, to try to trawl the past, I had a member of staff going back a good few years now, and they just couldn't see that their manner of communication was actually causing problems in the team. Now, if I said to them, well, I communicate like this, and why don't you do it like that? It would not have been effective, because in order for it to be effective, the individual has to realise what the impact of those behaviours is having on those around them and their chances of career progression, and they have to come to those conclusions themselves. So therefore, the coach needs to do some very careful questioning that will actually start to raise awareness of those things, because it's far more powerful. As human adults, we hate being told to do stuff, absolutely despise it. We like to think we come up with the answers by ourselves, but the careful questioning and the careful coaching will actually get those answers to emerge. I mean, if we think about the word to educate, the word educate comes from the Latin educare, and educare means to draw or lead out. And that's what we do when we're questioning. We're drawing or leading out knowledge that people probably already have, but subconsciously are not aware of it. So I think we better push on to the final session, because we've only got 10 minutes or so more. So let's have a look at some of the challenges that can arise during a coaching session and how we might address those. Okay, so another little class point app, and without the dodgy music this time. So code 29035, what challenges particularly do you think leaders might encounter during those coaching conversations? And now those could be challenges with individuals, relating to the individuals and their attitude to coaching, or there could be challenges in relation to you and your position. Do you think coaching could expose you in some way? What might those challenges be? Okay, so we've got a lot of good stuff coming through here. Resistance, yes. Resistance is far less likely if you have a coaching culture. So if the organisation has started from the top with a coaching policy and has an introductory session to introduce people into what coaching is and what mentoring is and what it's supposed to achieve, then that clarity can avoid resistance. It's also extremely important here to be very clear between about performance management. Okay, so if you're coaching somebody and it is actually a performance management issue that you're dealing with, you need to be absolutely clear about that from the outset. If it's not a performance management, if this is a developmental conversation, if there are no real nitty issues, if somebody's not on a performance management program, for example, then that needs to be made clear as well, because one of the biggest mistakes that leader coaches make is becomes intrinsically enmeshed with performance management and holding people to targets. And whilst coaching can contribute to performance management in a developmental sense, it should never be used as a tool for performance management if it's not specifically stated that that's what it's for at the outset. And that's why sometimes it's better to delegate, separate the two functions. So, for example, you know, a leader may give some time to somebody who is experienced within the organization and familiar with simple model of coaching to actually do some coaching for them of the individual. If there are issues, and they come up particularly in relation to personality issues or practices, unhealthy practices. Ego, yes. And we did mention that earlier, that the ego can be very, very powerful in resisting sometimes. And again, most of the psychological literature on resistance puts it down to fear. The arrogant, insecure employee is possibly one of the most difficult type of employees to deal with. And that toxic mix of arrogance and insecurity can make them extremely defensive and high levels of resistance. So it's how do you work with that sort of person? And I'm not framing this as easy in any way. It's something that I've struggled with over the years as well, and many of my colleagues have. But it's how can you develop trust within that relationship? How can you develop that trusting relationship so that people will start to open up to you? And sometimes, you can use techniques. I mean, I have used, in certain cases, self-declaration. But you have to be very careful with that, because then it can come, but by self-declaration, I mean, this is what happened to me. But you have to be very careful with that, because sometimes it can come back and hit you between the eyes. So with care. Fear about upcoming change. Yes, in a change management situation, fear, worry about credibility, wanting instructions. That's a really good one. Yeah, why do people want to be told what to do all the time? People are often very reluctant to initiate, and they want instructions. Coaching's not about instructions. You can make suggestions, but actually instructions are about line management, not coaching. So again, if you give instructions to people too often within a coaching situation or a mentoring situation, what you'll find is that they become dependent upon you. And actually that's happened with a lot of my colleagues that are coaches coach people at very high level in government, some of them, or CEO of very, very big corporations. And I heard a case recently, actually, where one CEO will not go into a meeting now without his coach. And you think that's such an unhealthy codependent relationship. But that's the coach's fault for encouraging that codependent, probably because they were getting an awful lot of money for it. But there you are. So lots of different responses there. And again, I'm just going to close the submission there. I like the one about imposter syndrome, and I wish I had more time to go into it. And I'm very happy, Fidel, to do so in the future if you want a session on imposter syndrome, because that is one of the focus points about coaching. Is so many coaches come across imposter syndrome in the course of their work. I just want to bring the session into a close now and go to a final couple of slides. I just want to mention the coaching contract. The coaching contract is very, very important. In external coaching, it's used to agree things like timescales, financial remuneration, the rest of it, you know. But actually, a coaching contract is really important for leader coaches. And a coaching contract is a very, very simple piece of paper. It can be one side of A4 that outlines the expectations of both parties and what success might look like. The time and place for coaching. Are you going to carve out enough space to make time for this coaching? Because the worst thing in any organization, but I think it hits third sector organizations particularly hard because they tend to be smaller with less staff, is, you know, carving out the time for this coaching. A good coaching session can last 20 minutes, half an hour. But if the coach or if the employee keep cancelling and cancelling and cancelling, then it becomes very counterproductive, and it can lead to an awful lot of resentment on both parts. Time and place, prioritising, very important. Non-progression, what are you going to do if the coachee doesn't actually stick to their goals and you're just going over the same ground every week? You need to have a plan B, or you need to have a get-out clause. In other words, I'm giving up my valuable time to coach you because I'm invested in your development. But however, if you don't show that you're invested in your development, then obviously my time's very valuable and those sessions may have to cease, and we may have to think of another way to approach the issues. And termination of coaching, when the employee feels that that's it, that they've enjoyed the sessions, they've been profitable, but that's where they want to stop. And again, coming back to where you might want to stop if the employee isn't actually showing the kind of motivation that you want to see from that investment in your time. So thank you all very much. I will send out some resources with the slides, or whether the team will send them out. And thank you very, very much to Fidel for inviting me, and also to Emily and her team for setting up and organising the session. There is a QR code for some feedback. It would really help the Centre for Voluntary Sector Studies if you could fill in that feedback, because it helps them to think of future events, etc. And thank you all very much for your questions, and I'll hand back to Fidel now.
Jacqueline, thank you very much for an inspiring talk. And I'm delighted we touched a subject which people don't think about every day. And sometimes we associate it with some sort of hierarchical position in the voluntary sector in particular. And I remember even myself having served a long time in the voluntary sector. It was only towards the end of my stint in the sector that I was introduced to coaching, and I learned a lot through those sessions. In particular, knowing that the coach was there to help me as opposed to give me advice. I mean, that was key. Challenged me to think outside the box, and I think that's what we have done today. And I'm very sure people on the call will obviously take heed of your advice to do the sort of the evaluation, because through the evaluation then we can tell what we need. And we also be looking at some of the ideas which came up through the interactive sessions. I think we did 3. And for those who asked questions we didn't get a chance to cover, by all means, if you are really, really keen to talk to us after you have seen the resources, by all means, get back to us, and then we see what we can do. On this note, thank you very much, Jacqueline. Thank you very much, Emma, and the team who have made it happen. And we look forward to welcoming you at our next webinar. I hope people have registered, so otherwise you won't hear about it. You had the option to register for the mailing list, but you will certainly be getting communications from us with a link to the recording and the resources which Jacqueline promised to send. And thank you very much, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.